Hello everybody, today we are going to be removing the power brake unit from this 1955 Clipper here. This is something that if you bought a car that's been sitting more than a couple years, especially more than half a decade, you're going to want to pull this out and clean it out thoroughly before you start driving the car. Of course, at the same time, you're going to want to change your brake fluid. If you bought a car that's been sitting even longer than that, then this unit's going to need rebuilt entirely. Now, it's worth noting these steps are mainly for the power brake. If you have manual brakes, it's, I guess, similar enough, but there's enough differences, especially near the end. But actually getting to the unit is more or less the same, depending on whether you have power brakes or manual brakes. So really the easiest way is if you have a shop lift or if you're comfortable putting your car on jack stands, you can do that and just access it from the bottom. But a lot of people either don't have that, or they're just not comfortable with it, or they'd rather just work on things from above the car. And it's really not too hard as long as you have the proper steps. As long as you do the proper steps in the right order. So we're just going to cover that today. So step one, which is not strictly necessary, but you may find it a bit easier. So you can skip this step unless you feel that there's too much still in your way later, then you can come back to this. And of course, this is only if you have the power windshield washer. But you can disconnect all the hoses here and push them aside, and then you can remove this bracket and get it out of your way. So to disconnect the hoses, you want to hold the electrical connector with your right hand and then gently pull out the connection with your left hand there. Make sure to not get that backwards, otherwise you'll just damage the electrical connector. But I got this unclipped successfully, and then all of these are just vacuum hoses. These will just slide off, and depending how old or new they are, they may or may not be stuck on like crazy. Though I should say, I said they're vacuum hoses. Technically they're not all vacuum hoses. One of them is the hose that actually delivers the washer fluid to the windshield, and the other two are vacuum hoses. We can just disconnect all of these, just twist and slide these off. There we go. So now we have our washer unit removed, and we can gently push this bundle of hoses aside and just kind of deposit it into the firewall there. Not into the firewall, into the inner fender well is what I meant to say. Oh, and as a note, that's right under our hood. So you want to be careful to not shut the hood if you put something right about there. And then we can come in with our Phillips head screwdriver and then simply unscrew our bracket here. All right, as we can see, we have our bracket removed from here. Next, what we need to do is remove our power steering hose clamp if you have power steering equipped. So this just comes off with this flathead machine screw here. We can just loosen it up and then move the power steering lines a bit out of the way. All right, I was able to remove my power steering lines from here, and then there is also these kind of clips there that they are clipped into. So I was able to pop those out of there and kind of just shove them under my throttle linkage there. Now you'll notice I have my plug wires removed. That's coincidental. You don't need to do that. So your situation may vary just a little bit here, but no big deal. I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out. Oh, and also watch when you're unscrewing this, because that screw is not captive, and it's the nut I mean is not captive, and it's a square nut. So make sure you keep a hold of that when you're unscrewing it. Next thing you want to do is remove this duct here. Now this one is not installed properly. It's supposed to be slid onto here and here, but this car actually had this kind of goofy thing in place. It had a metal type of duct here, which is not original. This one is pretty close to original, but it's also so old that I couldn't install it properly for the purposes of this video. So on your car, if you even have a duct here or whatever, you should be trying to just kind of rotate it around a little bit and kind of pry it off one end. And then once you get that one out of the way, you can pry it off the other one. Then eventually you'll just be able to remove it here. Something kind of like this. There we go. I also think this one's the wrong length to even install in there, but I couldn't find the correct one, so oh well. The next thing to do is there is a Phillips drive, kind of this wire in the way here. This screw right here, is that on camera? Yes it is, okay. You need to loosen or remove this screw and the corresponding clip that holds this mounting cable in place. And then you also need to remove this little speed nut here. And then we can slip the mounting cable off of this air duct. So we just want to unscrew this. I know there was so much grime on it, maybe you couldn't really see what I was talking about. Just unscrew this self tapper, and then there is this clip right here. So we just lift that off. And then these speed nuts, normally you can kind of just rock them back and forth and pull them off right like that. And then this mounting cable can just slip off. Surprised all that worked first try. A lot of times something will just be a little bit rusted or a little bit stuck or something where you might need to get some pliers in here and kind of persuade it. But this one worked great. And my favorite thing to do is once I have all that off, you either want to put it in a labeled plastic bag, or it takes about 5 seconds to just reinstall everything. And then you can remove it again when you need it on your reinstall. So the next thing we want to do is we've got all of our vacuum lines here kind of in the way. This, okay, well I can move let's move these out of the way. So this T here, this goes from the check valve on the carburetor, goes over here, and then this one goes down to the brake cylinder, and then this one goes to the canister, which is our kind of vacuum reserve. So there we go. Canister is that right there. So what we want to do is disconnect the connections on this T here. What I like to do is disconnect the brake hose and well, this one's already loose for some reason. Disconnect this one and disconnect the lower one there, and that will get our vacuum, get our things disconnected. This one's not strictly necessary, but it's easier just to get it out of the way so we can get some more space in this area. The next thing we're going to do, like I said, remove this and disconnect that hose. And then we're also going to remove this duct here. This is held on with 4 Phillips head screws. So I'll just show you one, but the other 3 are pretty obvious. They're just evenly spaced around. So we can just zip that off, and that gets us our clip also on this one. The vacuum line. And then we can just do the other 3 and then lift this straight off. Worth noting, how I find it's easiest to remove vacuum lines is to grab a pair of lineman pliers specifically, and then grab that spring clip to compress it, and then you can just wiggle it back and forth while you pull off. See, I kind of slipped out of my grasp there. Compress it like that. Then I can wiggle it back and forth with the pliers while pulling up on this T here. And it really ain't too bad, even though it's probably been in place for 40 years with that clip on there. I can move my vacuum line out of the way here. Still got to take 2 more screws off this. All right, we got the duct off there. There is a gasket behind that, but this one came out easily. Well, really, they all come out easily. You might have to wiggle it or something a little bit. As long as you got all 4 screws out, it should be fine, unless somebody used some real crazy, like, gasket maker or something behind that. Maybe it'll really be stuck on, but I've never personally seen that. Anyway, so next, we want to, quote, simply disconnect our brake lines from the master brake cylinder here. Though a lot of times that can be very difficult. One, they're in kind of a goofy location, and that's why we removed as much stuff out of the way as we did. It is right down there. It's those 2 lines. A lot of times they are pretty stuck. These brake lines certainly look original, so we will find out how easily those come off. Now, it goes without saying that if you damage your brake lines just getting these off, then they really should have been replaced anyway. So don't worry about damaging them per se, as long as all you're doing is twisting these off with a, with a flare nut wrench. Then there's nothing to worry about. If you break them, then you should have needed to replace your brake lines anyway, instead of finding that out in a more unfortunate way, let's say. But yes, just take your flare nut wrench, and hopefully it won't be too hard to just wrench both of those off of there. Now, if you know your brake lines are screwed and you don't care about having them to use as templates, you can also just take some bolt cutters or something and just cut straight through them, and make this step a little easier on yourself. In case you never used a flare nut wrench before, there really ain't nothing to it. Got my 3/8 wrench here. You just slide her on, turn it about half a turn, or it's actually probably, a third of a turn at a time. Just keep going until it's all the way out. There we go, we got one out. And then we just repeat the process for the second one here. So once you got all your brake lines off, we want to just come around to the inside of the car here. The accelerator pedal is just held on kind of with a ball joint, held onto the throttle linkage, so you can just lift it off. That was surprisingly loud for prying on the accelerator. I don't know what... This car is a little rusty anyway. You normally just pry this right off so we can see our ball came out there. So there we go, that step's done. And then the other step is that we need to disconnect our Easamatic pedal, which is just held on with a pin, and a pin that is secured with a cotter pin. There we go. And then this can now raise up out of the way. You shouldn't have to like secure it or anything. We just want to make sure it can get out of the way. Next up, you want to pry the carpet forward, which in this car is absolutely disgusting. Zoom out a little bit here. But there we go. That was actually quite easy. It is either because the carpet has, oh, you can even see in the air. Anyway, the dust that got kicked up. Anyway, this one was quite easy to remove. Actually, I know this one's been out because the screws that hold it in are not all the same. And I checked in the parts book, and it gives it as a, I should note first that this is group number 1.363. And the hardware is a 832 by 1/2 inch long self-tapping Philister head, which is what 4 out of the 5 screws are. So, if I can, there we go, get that unseized with rust, to get the rust unseized there. And then, I don't recall it mentioning washers, though, yeah, these definitely have to have washers because the gap is gigantic there. So, yep, so I'll just unscrew these and we'll go from there. Oh, and looks like that one is already missing. So the last one is this here. Yeah, I did double check. The parts book does not mention washers at all, even though they're obviously needed here, which just goes to show that especially when it comes to hardware, parts book usually ain't all that quite right. So if you're doing any type of restoration work or anything, always make sure to label your hardware, because if you go strictly by the book, especially when it comes to washers, this is not the first time I've seen something that had washers and clearly probably should have washers, and the parts book did not mention washers. So, I don't know, just my 2 cents on that. Now if I could just get this one awkwardly angled screw out. I need to get a shorter screwdriver maybe. Oh, now it's coming out. Only a matter of time. So, what we should do now is you want to just lift this whole assembly straight out, which I don't know if I'll be able to do one-handed, but it's also not terribly hard to just kind of figure out what you should be doing. Let me get the camera tripod. So apologies if this is not very clear because my tripod is at a really awkward angle, but we're going to try and lift this out here. Yeah, this actually kind of does slot up under the rubber at the bottom of the firewall trim there. So you may need to kind of get it to slide down first. and then remove it. I kind of forget. A lot of cars don't even have that trim there anymore. The other thing you can do, and you may be looking at your screen going, why don't you just remove these 4 bolts? And you can do that if you want. It kind of just depends on how hard this is to get out. So if I can't get it out with just a bit more trying here, then I'm just going to remove those bolts and let it drop out. But this is, removing this plate here is the instructions given in the factory service manual. Oh, there we go. Oh, and of course I tore up my, not that I really, well, this is rock hard. I said this is rubber, but I'm not even sure what it was originally. That is more the consistency of Bakelite. All right. So just a little bit more finagling and we can get this safely out of the car. Of course, our vacuum hose somehow got stuck on something, even though I tried to make sure it wouldn't. But no biggie there, so we can simply remove this from the car now. All right, so now we have our unit removed from the car, and the next step and the final step, if you're sending this to someone to get repaired, is simply to disconnect these 4 bolts. As an aside, I really don't understand. So obviously the color of this car is teal. I don't understand how this ended up getting painted teal, considering it's an internal part on the car. I can only assume, because it looks like the brake unit was also painted teal, that somebody took that off and then painted it separately. Geez, that's really on there. I painted it separately, then installed it. But why you would want to do that, I don't really know. I know people do paint these when they rebuild them, but the correct color is just gray. These were nickel plated or something from the factory. Zinc plated, something like that. So really should get another tetanus shot soon, I think, just as a precautionary measure. But yeah, once all these bolts are loosened up here, these units will just come right off. All right, guys, I managed to get the cover off here. Well, sort of. I was able to get 4 of the screws out, but one of them, as you can see, I ended up breaking it off. I ended up actually breaking an impact bit. I'll show you here. Oh, that is still hot. That was like 5 minutes ago. Anyway, I ended up breaking an impact bit just trying to get that screw out of here, and ended up breaking it off trying to use a screw extractor. Oh well, and that one's still in here. But this is what probably decades old brake fluid looks like. I know this car last ran but did not drive in 2001, which was 23 years ago. Honestly, I would guesstimate that this was done much, much longer than that, because how rusty this thing was, this car would have had to have been driven a long time after this was last rebuilt. Though, theoretically, if they kept up on their brake fluid changes, it would have been fine. But yeah, check this out. It's just powder. It's yeah, not exactly what you want to have going through your brake lines there. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. At least the removal from the car process went very well. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. Oh, and I should say, just for completeness sake, the installation is reverse of disassembly. Really nothing to it, as long as you kept all your hardware and you kept track of what goes where. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I will catch you later.